Hello, it's The Week in Art. I'm Ben Luke. This week, Art Basel, the nuance behind the big sales. Plus, journalist Lynn Barber on her interviews with artists and the Caribbean-born neoclassical artist Guillaume Lethière. It's arguably the best loved of all the big art fairs among collectors and dealers, but what have we learned about the art market at this year's Art Basel in its original Swiss home? The art newspaper's acting art market editor, Tim Schneider, tells us about the big sales in Switzerland amid the wider art market picture. The journalist Lynn Barber has a new book out called A Little Art Education, in which she reflects on her encounters with artists from Salvador Dalí to Tracey Emin. I talked to her about the highs and lows of several decades of artist interviews. And this episode's Work of the Week is Woman Leaning on a Portfolio by Guillaume Lethière, made in 1799. Lethière was born in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean to a plantation-owner father and an enslaved mother, but eventually became one of the most notable painters of his period in France and beyond. I talked to Esther and Olivier Meslay, the curators of a major survey of Lethière's work opening this week at the Clark Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and travelling later in the year to the Louvre in Paris. Before all that, our latest subscription offer, a free 8-week trial of a digital subscription to the Art Newspaper. Visit theartnewspaper.com to find out more. And do also subscribe to this podcast and our sister podcast, A Brush With, wherever you're listening. The latest episode of A Brush With features a conversation with Otterbong and Kanga. Please also give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. Now, the first half of 2024 has followed last year in being somewhat subdued and jittery in the art market, an atmosphere only amplified after the cyber attack on Christie's ahead of their New York auctions last month. So what can Art Basel, traditionally the fair for which dealers pull out all the stops and bring their most prized objects, do to counter the rather gloomy mood? I spoke to Tim Schneider, our acting art market editor, about this year's fair. Tim, I'm very pleased that we're talking on day 3 of Art Basel after 2 days of selling and buying in the fair, because the picture from day 1 was very different to the picture after day 2. So let's start with day 1 first of all. It was a kind of day of fireworks, basically.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're trying to evaluate it based on just what the reported sales were, there were some major works that were sold. I mean, you had 2 different galleries that sold, by their accounting, somewhere between $35 and $45 million worth of works on the first day. You had David Zwirner closing a deal for a Joan Mitchell Sunflowers painting from the early 90s for $20 million. There was a Gorky drawing that Hauser and Wirth sold for $16 million, and multiple works that were in the 7 to 8 figure range, basically. So if you're purely trying to evaluate the fair based on were there works going for top tier prices, then absolutely that was true. But also there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, I think.
And there's this rather lovely quote that we got from Ivan Wirth of Hauser and Wirth Gallery, where he talked about how much doom porn there was, and people weren't just here to eat the sausages in the courtyard and so on. And so he was saying it's as lively as it's ever been and so on.
Yeah, I don't know that lovely is the word that I would identify with that quote necessarily. I think that if I can go the rest of my life without thinking about Ivan Wirth and porn in any capacity, I'll be better off. But that being said, it was definitely a bombastic quote. Definitely he came out to really bang the drum for the idea that Art Basel is, as you're saying, as good as it's ever been. And I think that that is probably true for some people, but it's not true for everyone.
Right. There was an Art World insider who you quoted in your piece as reflecting this fact that Art Basel is the fair, basically the fair that people love the most, the fair that people enjoy attending the most, and the one in which the big dealers bring the blue chippest of the blue chip works. And they described it as the big kahuna. It's the fair that ritually, year in, year out, prompts the dealers to bring their A game, basically.
Yeah, that's always been its reputation. I mean, it has essentially had that standing since the very beginning, which was in the early 1970s. So for going on 50, almost 60 years at this point, this has been the fair in everyone's mind that really, as you're saying, is the king of the hill in a way. And so I think that there is some growing, I don't want to say concern about it, but there's definitely some momentum in some other directions. Like Art Basel Paris is something that, at least in the US, a lot of people are talking about there being some kind of a choice that's maybe coming. If you have to travel to Europe twice in 3 months to go to a major art fair, do you want to go to both of these? If you have to choose between Basel and Paris, which one do you go to? All that kind of stuff. But that's more a point of conversation than it is an actual change in the business. So for the time being, right now, for sure, there's just not a lot of fairs anywhere in the world where you can sell an artwork for $20 million. And this is one of them, if not the one.
Right. Now, and to your credit, you looked beneath those headlines that the galleries provided. And as you were talking to people, there were actually some interesting points in that first piece that you made where people were categorizing the events in a sort of more nuanced way. And one of the interesting points was that Noah Horowitz, the CEO of Art Basel, said that there was a desire to overanalyze market prognostics. But the fact is that the art market is about human-to-human movements and unique objects. And this, I think, is a really important point. It's also interesting that Ivan Worth actually did say that the art market was happening at a more humane pace now. So even though there are big headlines, they are all still saying that the market is not where it was a few years ago.
Yeah, and I think that that's okay. What I'm trying to bring into the conversation, I think, is the sense from the people that I've spoken to that, yes, it's not necessarily easy, but the business is still happening. Major deals are still getting done. Even kind of rank and file galleries are figuring out a way to get by. I mean, it's certainly not a perfect situation, but as Steve Henry, who is the senior partner at Paula Cooper Gallery, told me for a piece that I wrote yesterday, it's always been hard. Like, selling art is a difficult business. And what's unusual isn't when it's hard. What's unusual is when it's easy. I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, but that was the gist of the message. And I think that there's a ton of truth to that.
Absolutely. And it's really good that you spoke to Dominique Levy, who is a very much a blue chip dealer. And she's saying that it's very hard to decipher the art market. So even the top insiders within the market are struggling to say, this is the way it's going, this is where we're at.
I think that there are not a lot of broad statements I can make about anything that I feel really comfortable in the truth of. One of them, though, is that people tend to like simple stories about things. It's true in the art market, it's true in politics, it's true in practically every valence that you can think of. And the reality is that simple stories, generally speaking, are not super helpful. They're not usually very accurate. And if you really want to understand what's happening out there in the art market right now, I just don't think that there's an elevator pitch for it, unless it's something like, it's tough, but people are figuring it out.
So to warm to a theme, what we're involved in here is a sort of nuance porn.
Right. Wow, we're just a whole number of subgenres of adult filmmaking just really being pioneered here at Art Basel this week.
Exactly. So to explore that a bit more deeply, one of the things that you have illustrated in the day two piece is this idea that actually galleries are working twice as hard to achieve the sort of things that they were achieving almost effortlessly a few years ago. So they're getting the sales done, but they're really having to push for them.
Right. And I think that that's why it's important to be able to go out and hear about the actual labor, the legwork that goes into getting these deals done. Because if at the end of the day, all that you're looking at is, well, what sold for how much and on what day was it reported, then you're just going to end up getting an oversimplified view of things. And I think it's really, really important to understand that these things don't come easily all the time. And if they're not coming as easily, it's important to note that, as opposed to just saying like, well, we still have these same results, and so everything must be just as smooth as it possibly can be at all times.
In fact, actually, the longer that you have at a fair, in a way, you can get a much more accurate picture, right? Because there's this phenomenon which is expanding, which is the pre-selling. So, for instance, that Joe Mitchell, Davis Werner's not going to not talk to anybody before the fair about it. To what extent do you think, basically, those first day sales that we hear about is mostly a sort of very massaged list of sales that were done probably before anybody get anywhere near Basel?
So it's impossible to say in any kind of definitive or quantitative way how much work is being pre-sold in front of any fair, let alone this fair in particular in this moment. But I think that in general, what you can say is that the more unsettled that a market may be, or the harder that everyone has been working the rest of the year in the lead up to something like this, the higher the probability that people are going to be more interested in just getting something done when they can get it done. Like in a perfect world, I think that most dealers would like to have everyone come to the fair, have the sort of competition aspect there where you have different collectors who are really know that this is a moment of urgency. They need to try to get this thing now before someone else beats them to it. I think that dealers, for the most part, like to be able to actually really think carefully about who they want this work to go to. And they may not know all of the players that could vie for that until the fair starts, until people start coming to the booth, or at least right beforehand. But this is something that I ended up threading into the first day sales report. There's this, and as much as I hate to be the guy who like makes war references, because I feel like there's just way too much of that, I couldn't help but thinking about this quote from the General George Patton, which is, a good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan next week.
Right.
And I think that in the context of a sort of uneven, difficult market, dealers are taking a bit of that spirit and saying, okay, if I can get something that feels pretty good in the lead up to the fair, then I'm happy to just get this deal done, as opposed to what might be a perfect transaction if I wait a little bit longer until the fair actually opens.
Right. And you point out that people probably arrived at the fair with pretty low expectations in general because of the way that the market's been going so far this year.
I think that's definitely true. I think that anyone who came into this fair expecting that there was going to be some sudden sea change and that all of a sudden we were going to be back to the sort of heady times of late 2021, early 2022, I think that they would have been fooling themselves. And the rockiness, the challenges, the difficulties of the past 18 months or so, I think have chastened everyone a little bit. And that is probably a good thing for business to some extent, because it means that people are going to be a little more humble about what qualifies as a deal worth doing.
Now, one of the aspects that's really, really interesting in terms of nuance in your piece from day two is all about speculators. And we've heard so much about ultra contemporary art, so the newest of new art, wet paint and so on, which has been selling for extraordinary prices, and lots of speculators have been buying this work and then auctioning it, and it's gone for huge sums and so on. There are dealers that are telling you that the speculators have gone, is that right?
Yes, and this is something that happens in every market cycle that I've been a part of for the past close to 20 years at this point, where you'll have these exuberant moments. There will be a small subset of young artists who do mostly some kind of broadly similar thing. People get really, really excited about them. There is enough demand that the, let's say, less spiritually involved members of the art buying community will look at and say, oh, I can make a quick buck on this. I might be able to double my money on this in a year. I might be able to make 150% back in 3 months or 6 months, and I'm just going to do that. And so that only works for so long, because inevitably things in the broader market change, things in the economy change, things go out of fashion, artists' works get oversaturated, all these kinds of things coalesce, and that heady moment passes. And as soon as that happens and you no longer have these opportunities for people to make extraordinary returns on things in very short time periods, they basically go away and try to arbitrage something else. Right. So we're in a moment like that right now. We have been now, I think, for some time. But the message, I think, from some of the dealers who work with young artists is that just because that thing was happening with again, a very small subset of artists in a particular age group doesn't mean that that's what the core of that part of the market is. Like most dealers who are selling artists under the age of 45, let's just say to keep it simple, they're not artists who were selling at these extraordinary amounts of money at auction. They're not artists that people were like trying to basically bribe each other to get access to. It's a quieter, more thoughtful trade most of the time. And just because that small sector of the market has kind of dried up, and you can point to a few examples here and there of artists who were selling for whatever, $300,000 at auction a few years ago, or really even like a year ago, and now they're selling for $30,000 or not selling at all. Like that doesn't mean that everybody else who was never a part of that thing is suddenly in dire straits.
Right.
It's like the people who are doing that buying are not the same people who are like thoughtfully collecting young artists under age 45 from dealers who only show at a couple of fairs a year or whatever else. It's just a different thing, and pretending that all of that segment of the market operates the same way is just naive and I think in a lot of ways damaging to the trade.
And it's important, I think, to stress that actually, I think most dealers, certainly that I've spoken to, of course there will be some that are not like this, but most dealers that I've spoken to hate all that speculative stuff. They want to just nurture good conversations with collectors and so on. Of course there are dealers that want to make a quick buck, but actually they want to look after their artists more than anything else, because that's actually economically much more sensible.
Right. And we should also point out here, too, that in those kinds of speculative frenzies, for the most part, the dealers aren't even the ones who are really making that much of the money. Like, right. It's the people who bought it and then flipped it, or it's the auction houses who are charging like a major premium for the works that are then selling for huge hammer prices or whatever else. But that being said, yes, you're absolutely right. I think that a large number of dealers at pretty much every level of the market prefer to be able to have these kinds of substantive conversations about what their artists are doing, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're up to in the studio, why it's important historically, all of those kinds of things. And one of the messages that I've gotten from people that I trust this week is that, yes, it's a tougher economic moment, but because the pace has slowed down, those kinds of conversations are coming easier, they're coming more frequently, people are engaging on a deeper level. There's an opportunity to build relationships in a way that frankly weren't there when everyone just needed to elbow each other out of the way to try to get the thing as fast as possible without, in some cases, even really thinking too much about what the thing is that they're trying to get.
Right. Okay. Now, Tim, we haven't spoken since the Christie's cyber attack, so I wanted to conclude our conversation today by talking a bit about that. Obviously, it was a massive shock. The auctions happened and Christie's did make the sales they wanted to make. But how massive a shock to the industry is this? How broad are the implications and so on? What do you make of it in terms of what it tells us about the market and the potential threats to the market in the coming months and years?
To me, the biggest message is that if this can happen to an organization as large and well-resourced as Christie's, then essentially everyone on the sell side should be thinking very carefully about how vulnerable they are. And this is not a sexy thing to think about. No one who sells art for a living really wants to just say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take a morning, few meetings, a couple of weeks. I'm going to spend, I don't know how much money to just like make sure that my internet security is in tip-top shape, or I'm going to really do a thorough audit of which information on my clients I need to actually digitize and which kind I don't, and all these kinds of, like, nobody wants to spend that time in that way. But the reality is that this is a real threat. Ultimately, maybe the way to say it is this: there are enough high-profile hacks out there of other companies and other industries, often enough that it's clear that the art industry is vulnerable to some of these same things. And I think that the Christie's hack itself is ultimately, or should be, a wake-up call about this. I think that there's a tendency within the art industry, which for the most part is a large number of small businesses, there's a tendency among that group of people to say, well, I'm just not big enough to matter. No hacker is going to come out and target me because I'm just a small business. I'm not Gagosian. I'm not Christie's. I'm not whoever. And that's not really the case. Like, these types of things happen on smaller scales all the time. And so I think that we've just reached a point where no matter what size you are, if you aren't paying attention to this aspect of your business, you could be in trouble. And it's the kind of thing that no one wants to spend time on until it's already too late.
And lastly, how worried should Christie's be about the class action lawsuit that was filed last week in New York? Is that potentially a massive issue, or is it something that could be quite easily dealt with?
I am not an expert in class action lawsuits, and so I want to be very careful about what I say in this particular context. My sense from reading the complaint and doing some background research on it is that at this point, this is not necessarily a huge problem for Christie's. I'm relatively certain that it can be dealt with in one way or another without bringing the house down. Potentially terrible pun, but let's just go with it. We'll have to see how it develops. I mean, I think that that's the thing about class action lawsuits, is that it's somebody makes a kind of opening gambit and inviting other people who they think have been disadvantaged or harmed in the same way as them to join. And then depending on how many people decide to join them, and who those people are, how well funded they might be, then these things can go in very different directions. Based on what is out there at this point, I don't think that Christie's has a tremendous amount to fear about this lawsuit as it stands at this moment on June 13th of 2024. Maybe a month from now, it'll be a different conversation, but for the moment, I think that in the grand scheme of the Christie's cyber attack saga, the class action lawsuit is worth noting, but not yet anywhere close to the main story here.
Okay, well, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Always a pleasure.
Art Basel continues until Sunday, the 16th of June. Coming up, Lynn Barber's encounters with artists and Guillaume Lethière. But first, here's this week's news bulletin. New York police are investigating vandalism targeting the homes of the Brooklyn Museum director, Anne Pasternak, and several Jewish members of the museum's board of directors. According to information posted by New York officials, a building in Brooklyn Heights and other locations affiliated with Brooklyn Museum leaders were targeted overnight between Tuesday and Wednesday. Outside the building in Brooklyn Heights, a banner was hung with the message, "Brooklyn Museum Anne Pasternak, white supremacist Zionist," and "funds genocide," as well as blood red handprints. Like many US institutions, since the onset of the Hamas attacks in Israel and Israel's military action in Gaza, the Brooklyn Museum has faced calls to cut ties with corporate partners and individual owners whose finances activists say are tied to Israel's government, its military, or the Israeli defense industry. The New York State Governor, Kathy Hochul, New York City's Mayor, Eric Adams, and the members of the Association of Art Museum Directors, or AAMD, of which Pasternak is a member, separately denounced the vandalism as anti-Semitism. Sources at the NYPD said that they're looking for around 15 people and that the group was last seen driving a rental truck on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. The Brooklyn Museum said in a statement that it was deeply troubled by these horrible acts targeting leaders connected to the museum. A former Vatican employee was arrested in a dramatic sting operation after trying to sell a manuscript by Gian Lorenzo Bernini that he'd allegedly stolen from an official archive of the Holy See. The individual met Mauro Gambetti, the head of administration at St. Peter's Basilica, at the Basilica on the 27th of May, in the belief that he would be selling him the 18-page manuscript, which details the gold leaf designs Bernini used to decorate the 29-metre tall baldacchino canopy that rises above the Basilica's altar. but Gambetti had teamed up with Vatican investigators as part of an audacious trap. After Gambetti handed over a €120,000 cheque in exchange for the manuscript, Vatican gendarmes swooped in and arrested the seller, who's been named as the art historian Alfio Maria Daniele Pergolizzi. He's believed to have stolen the manuscript from the archives of the Fabric of St. Peter's, an institution created in the 16th century to oversee construction of the basilica that now coordinates restoration of the building. Pergolizzi was head of the Fabric's communications department from 1995 to 2011. He's currently being detained in a Vatican prison. The headline-hitting portrait of King Charles III by the artist Jonathan Yeo has been defaced by animal rights activists from the group Animal Rising. The group posted a video on X, formerly Twitter, showing two protesters covering the painting with stickers inspired by the Wallace and Gromit animation films. The protest targeted King Charles's position as patron of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or RSPCA. A picture of Wallace was stuck to Yeo's work alongside a quote which states, "No cheese, Gromit, look at all this cruelty on RSPCA farms." The protest group says that RSPCA assured farms are presenting a misleading picture of animal welfare. The charity says that the concerns are being taken extremely seriously and it's acting swiftly to look into these allegations. Philip Moll, the dealer who's showing Yeo's painting until the 21st of June, confirmed it was unharmed. You can read all these stories and much more on the website or the app. Now, Lynn Barber is among the most renowned and unflinching interviewers in British journalism. Among many politicians and stars of stage and screen, she has, since 1969, when she talked to Salvador Dalí for Penthouse magazine, profiled many of the leading artists of the past half-century, including successive generations of artists in Britain. In her new book, A Little Art Education, she reflects on her encounters with everyone from Dalí to the so-called Young British Artists, or YBAs, like Tracey Emin and Sarah Lucas. I spoke to her in her North London home about the book. Lynn, at the start of your book, you say that you wished you were an artist rather than a writer.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, I just think artists have more fun, much more fun. I think they're great people. I really admire artists. I think they're more generous than writers on the whole. And they throw great parties and they smoke and drink and stay up late and misbehave, all those things I like. I mean, I wish I had a talent for art, but I absolutely don't, so that's sad.
But there's this interesting point that you make, is that you almost deliberately cultivate not being an art historian, not going further into theory, not going into the art history and so on, because in a way it allows you to respond more directly to the work somehow.
Yes, and I base that on the fact that because I read English literature at Oxford, that has sort of tainted my appreciation of books, in that I think I ought to like Middlemarch more than I liked Julie Cooper. And, you know, maybe if I hadn't had that education, I would just frankly say I prefer Julie Cooper. So there was a point with the art thing, and because my husband was an artist and he had a good art background, so I realised I was very uneducated about art, and I thought I could actually, you know, do a course in art history or something. But then I thought, I'll stick with my ignorance, actually. And because my job is interviewing people, ignorance is quite a good place to be coming from, because presumably you often share it with the readers. So I could ask quite naive questions and get good answers.
Can you say something about how you came then to start doing interviews with artists? There's a remarkable memoir of your meeting with Salvador Dalí in Paris in the book.
I mean, that was a real freak, because I was working for Penthouse magazine. The founder of Penthouse, Bob Guccione, was keen on art, and he said, "Do you speak French?" Which was daft, because actually Dalí didn't speak French. You know, he was speaking fractured English. Anyway, I said yes, I did, which I didn't. But anyway, I was sent to the Hotel Meurice, very, very grand hotel in Paris, to interview Dalí. And, you know, it's a wonderful time. And Dalí enjoyed being interviewed by me. He just banged on about masturbation for a long time and said, I must interview him again tomorrow. And I said, oh, I'm not staying in Paris. I've just got a one-day flight. And he said, oh, no, you stay. I'll get you a room at the Meurice. So I had this fabulous room. I was interviewing Dalí every morning, going to parties in his suite every night and just having a good time. But eventually Gala, his wife, who everyone was scared stiff of, obviously took against me and sort of put down a guillotine, and Dalí said, I'm afraid we've done enough interviewing, you must go home.
Right,
So,
and there's an interesting point that you make that when Gala entered the room,
Yeah,
it was
everyone-
like there was a chill in the room suddenly descended.
And one time at one of these evening parties, she was on the sofa and she sort of looked at me and patted the sofa. So I sat down next to her thinking, oh, good, a chance to talk to God. And she said, I hate journalists. And I thought, oh, well, that's a good start. And she was a real difficult so-and-so. Everyone was scared of her.
Yes, exactly. There's that sense in which he was performing for her in some ways. Isn't
Yes.
there? He gave you a gift as you left.
Yes, it's a wonderful silver conical hat with butterflies on stalks coming out of it. And he just gave it me as a sort of goodbye present.
Oh, amazing. And it was from the 1930s. It wasn't something you just dashed out in the 1960s when you
It
met
was
him.
something he'd made for Gala to wear to a fancy dress ball in the 30s or something. And I don't know why he thought he had to give me anything, but anyway, it was a very good time.
He was indeed. So tell me more about that sort of early period, because at that stage, and you make the point in the book that it's very difficult for people to imagine this now, artists were not in any way public figures.
No, absolutely not. And after Penthouse, I worked for the Sunday Express. And their attitude to contemporary art was sort of endless cartoons of women with two noses, meaning Picasso, or bodies with holes in, meaning Henry Moore. And, you know, a really strong Philistinism, which I think lasted probably up until, what do you think, 90s?
Well, I think that, like as you say in the book, there's this point where Hockney becomes a celebrity.
Oh, yes.
But he's an anomaly. He's a unique figure in that.
Yes.
There is this sort of explosion in swinging London of interest in art to a certain degree. But
Yes.
someone like Richard Hamilton, who's a great artist, but
Yeah.
he's not a public figure in the same way.
No, or Patrick Caulfield.
Right.
But then I was lucky that when Damien mounted the Frieze exhibition and then Sensation was shown at the Royal Academy, suddenly YBAs were all the rage. And I was then working for The Observer, which was quite happy for me to go and interview them. So I did, you know, one after another.
And that's interesting because you make a point also in the book about actors versus artists. And actually interviewing artists is much more fun than actors, but you would actually literally kind of quite deliberately go and interview one artist for every few actors, just to make sure you had a certain balance. At least.
Well, the trouble with actors is that PRs are coming at you the whole time.
And they
with
sit in the
suggestions.
room, don't they?
Yes, they do now. You know, actors are being sort of pushed at you the whole time. And if you're lazy, you just go and interview an actor. And I had to sort of push back and say, look, I've done half a dozen bloody boring actors, and can I now do an artist of my choosing? And actually, that worked out well.
Right. And as you say, that sort of YBA, as it's called, explosion happened in London at that time. So you were perfectly situated because you had that role in The Observer, which was an art-interested title.
Absolutely, yes.
So, and in the book, it's really interesting to me that you chose particularly to focus on the women artists of that period. So Damien Hirst is not in there. But Sarah Lucas, Tracey Emin and Rachel Whiteread are in quite substantial, lengthier pieces. Why did you decide to do that?
A, because they're people I interviewed more than once and had a sort of continuing relationship with. In fact, I did interview Damien not very well, Gary Hume, Mark Quinn. I mean, I did interview quite a lot of men artists, but when it came to it, the better interviews were with women.
And it's really interesting that you assert very clearly that you think Sarah Lucas is the sort of greatest artist of that period. Tell us about Sarah, because she has emerged, I think, over time to be almost the leading voice from that period.
Yeah.
But she managed that very carefully, didn't she? So.
I don't think she manages anything. I think it's just she is herself. She doesn't have any sort of career structure in mind, whereas Tracey to some extent does. But I don't know. I think she knew she was good. She always thought she was good. Sometimes she was appreciated. Sometimes she wasn't, but she went on doing it. And she's incredibly fecund. I mean, the speed with which she can make work is quite extraordinary, because she sort of cooked up her entire Venice Biennale show in about 3 months, as far as I can see.
She loves making.
She loves making. And she said originally that she didn't want to have a studio, although in fact now she does, because she liked the fact that she could be cooking or gardening and then suddenly an idea would strike and she'd just go and knock it out, you know.
She made so much work at her sort of kitchen table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then Tracey was a friendship, as you say. You hit it off immediately, and then you interviewed her a number of times and spent a lot of time with her. And actually over quite a difficult period of her life, as well as her kind of glory years, if you like.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about Tracey and your friendship?
Well, I was sent to interview her in, I think, 2001 was the first time. And for some reason, we just totally hit it off. And I think, although she'd done quite a lot of press before, I don't think she'd had a very stimulating interview, maybe. And also she was very keen to talk about herself. She still is. And I was keen to listen. And for some reason, she found out or knew that I was a bird watcher. And she gave me a lovely little drawing of a sparrow the very first time I saw her. And then she said, oh, you must come over a day or so later. I've got something to show you in the pub, the wonderful Golden Heart. And it was her father. And I don't know quite why she did that, but she wanted me to meet her father. And then she sort of created a row with him while they were together. But I gather that that was what always happened, you know. Anyway,
this is about him having two families.
Yes, I asked him how many children he'd got, and I think he said 5. And Tracey said, oh, no, you told me 23. Big difference. And also he'd been married. He'd got a wife while he was having Tracey and Paul with Pam. So he had run these 2 marriages sort of in tandem. And she was saying, that's not all right, that's not all right. But it was, you know, he sort of had a weary smile. I think he'd been put through all this before and didn't care very much.
But it showed you that she was prepared to, in a sense, open up as much as you were hoping she would.
Yes. And then she kept on asking me to parties and things. And then fairly soon after that, my husband died. And she was really good. She kept phoning me up and saying, oh, you're all right, you must come out to this party or we'll go and have lunch. And, you know, she really made an effort, I thought.
Right. And of course, because of that friendship, you document in the book about the kind of later stages of her life when she's an enormously successful artist with a lot of money and a property empire.
Yes, in Margate, yeah. Well, that was the most recent time when I went down to Margate, and her housekeeper drove me back to the station and was pointing to whole streets and sort of, that house is Tracey's, that warehouse is Tracey's, you know. She does own an awful lot of property. And I suppose she's quite canny about money.
Right. I think one of the things it sort of suggests is that difference between that earlier period where artists were not of any particular public interest and artists as kind of superstars and celebrities. It shows the sort of journey that has happened in your lifetime of interviewing artists.
And I think Tracey and Damien sort of led the way. And some artists like Rachel Whitetree, perhaps, even Sarah Lucas, are a bit sniffy about that, you know. Whereas I'm all for it. I think, you know, I don't like a sort of ivory tower artist myself.
But one of the most interesting meetings that you have in the book is, well, a series of meetings with Howard Hodgkin, the painter. Oh, yeah. I remember reading at the time, and it was true of Howard, I met him too, that when he was remembering things about his past, he would burst into tears. Yeah. But this happened several times.
I know, and I hadn't been more... Since then, lots of people said, oh, I met Howard Hodgkin and he burst into tears. I hadn't been warned. And also we were in these quite posh restaurants, you know, and then he's suddenly going blub, 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 and waiters are coming, handing him napkins and things. And I was sort of, I don't like this.
But you do esteem him as an artist, and you make a point of saying that you very greatly love his paintings.
I do. I don't own one, though.
No, right. But the titles were the thing that your view of his titles upset him.
Yes, and actually Valdemar Janacek made the same point, you know, that they are really sort of Vanity Fair titles that he gives, you know, a Picasso at the end of the swimming pool or something, you know, something yucky. And I just wondered why I did that.
Right. And one that got away in the book is Lucian Freud.
Yes.
But you reproduce an absolutely hilarious letter that he sent you in relation to a request for an interview. Can you tell us about that?
Well, you can see it in a minute. It's in the Louvre next door.
Is that the best place to put unpleasant letters sent to you by potential interviewees?
Well, if people come here, I say, oh, do you want to see my Freud? And then I have to take them to the Louvre. Well, I kept bombarding him with letters, trying to get an interview. And in one of them, I said, I know you work all the time, but you must sometimes have to have a meal or go to the dentist. And his letter says something like, Dear Mrs. Barber, your letter to me is based on the assumption that there exists some reason or need for you to interview or write about me. I do, as you rightly suppose, occasionally eat something and, as a result, go to the dentist, but that is some way from agreeing to be shat on by a stranger. Sincerely, Lucian Freud.
That does indicate that after a certain point you gained a certain reputation. There was a certain wariness of public figures to talk to you.
Yeah.
Did you find that happened a lot with artists in particular?
No, because artists are less media aware than anyone, which is a nice thing about them. And also I was slightly interviewing them in a different sort of way, because in those days, especially with the YBAs, and this was before Google, remember, I was actually trying to find out some basic facts, some background about their families, what art school they went to. I was giving a sort of easy interview, I'd say.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose artists can be incredibly private people and just want to talk about the work.
Yeah.
But you've always tried to avoid talking about the theory and well, not the work. You talk about the work, but trying to get to why they're making the work, essentially. Asking them why, what it's all about.
Yes, but also just find out what they're like as people and their sort of working habits. I mean, it's very basic, unsubtle stuff that I'm getting, but it's quite useful, I think.
One of the things that really emerges from the book is your real love of artists, actually.
Yes.
And I think you talk at the end about being full of admiration for their consuming passion.
Yes, and their courage, I think, because, I mean, it's probably not true now, but when my lot all started, there was no sort of career in art. You didn't sort of think, oh, I'll go and make £1 million. And most artists right up until the YBA sort of subsisted by teaching a couple of days a week and producing work, but not expecting to make a lot of money.
And I think most artists now, it's the same.
Is it? Yeah.
It's still, I think,
it's
very much a 1% situation of artists who are anywhere near that. Yeah, very much so.
So I like that courage to build a career based on their own creativity, which, is a brave thing to do anyway.
I wanted to end by talking about the Turner Prize, because I think your account of being a juror of the Turner Prize is probably the only account we really have from the inside of that process.
Yes.
So can you tell us, it was a mixed experience for you, to say the least.
It started with a high when I got a letter saying, would I? And I was so excited and thrilled, and I thought, wow, this is really terrific. And then it went downhill all the way, basically, because I was trying to do it by the rules, which are that you had to see all these shows. I didn't realise that the other jurors were often just doing it online, and I thought, and some of the shows were in Sao Paulo or something, and the expenses were £200. So I was thinking, well, this is quite a hard gig.
You suffered for your diligence.
Well, I didn't get an umpire, that's for sure. But also, I hadn't realised how many exhibitions there were. And does it still exist? There's a sort of little leaflet that listed all the...
It's called New Exhibitions of Contemporary Art. It's online now. I don't know if there is still the leaflet, probably. But yeah, it's a very useful thing.
I'm
with
sure.
Hundreds of shows, as you pointed out.
Hundreds of shows. And so I was thinking, God, how can I get round all this stuff? So I thought I'd go and do Viner Street, which in theory, according to the leaflet, had 12 galleries. I mean, about 6 of them I couldn't find at all, One or two of the others were there but locked up. Often there was supposed to be a video or something that wasn't working. And it was just a sort of ghastly experience. And anyway, I kept plodding on and going to lots of shows. But then each of the jurors had to nominate, I think we had to choose 6 each. I mean, all my choices was sort of shot down in flames. Although one of them, Cecily Brown, has since come very good, hasn't she?
Well, yes, she's a very prominent artist.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, I spotted her early. So we arrived at this shortlist, and everyone had been telling me all the time, don't worry your little head, because actually Nick Sirota, by some sort of magical wizardry, manages to get what he wants. But he hardly said a word, and I keep thinking about how he... On the other hand, we did end up with Tom Apps, who I think was the one he wanted. I was thinking, how was that accomplished? I think how it worked was he went round the table and somebody would say, I like Rebecca Warren because X, Y, Z. And then we'd all say a bit about Rebecca Warren. And actually none of us suggested Tom Apps. But he kept going around and sort of saying, and what about Tom Apps? And then we're also sort of saying, oh, yeah, she's obviously good. I mean, she's good, but just not very exciting, I thought. But actually, when it came to then they put up their shows, actually, Tom App's room was the best by far. It was really good. It was lovely. Yeah.
And she won the prize.
And she won the prize, yes. But, no, it wasn't a happy experience at all. And I felt I was being put down a lot because the others were professional art people. And I saw tons of art. I think that was quite useful for me because it meant that now if I see something original, it leaps out as being original. I think, oh, I haven't seen anything like that before. And I suppose that gave me a sort of confidence that I didn't have before.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. That was good fun.
A Little Art Education by Lynn Barber is published by Cheerio and priced £15. And now it's time for the work of the week. The Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and the Louvre in Paris have collaborated on a major new survey of the work of Guillaume Lethière, an artist probably born enslaved in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, who eventually achieved great fame in France and more widely in Europe. Among the highlights of the show is Woman Leaning on a Portfolio, a painting made in around 1799. And I spoke to the two organisers of the show at the Clark, Esther Bell, Deputy Director and Chief Curator, and Olivier Meslay, the museum's director, about the artist and the picture. Esther, we're going to talk about a particular work by Guillaume Lethière in a minute, but I think it's really important that we begin by talking about his biography and just establishing who he was, because the fact is he's an artist with huge acclaim in his lifetime who not many people know much about today. So tell us about him.
That's right. So Guillaume Lethière was born in 1760 in Sainte-Anne, Guadeloupe. He was the son of a man named Pierre Guillaume, who worked for the king and was also a plantation owner. His mother was an enslaved woman of mixed race named Marie-Françoise du Pépéi. By the way, Lethière means the third because he was the third child of Marie-Françoise and Pierre Guillaume. And when Lethière was 14, his father took him to France and supported his artistic education. And so he begins his artistic journey probably when he was still living in Guadeloupe. But really, we can first trace his activity as an artist in mainland France when he is quite young, a teenager. And actually in our exhibition, we have one of his earliest drawings, an academy or a life drawing, and he signs it at the lower right, Guillaume Lethière from Guadeloupe, and it kind of asserts his place of origin.
And Olivier, when he comes to France, he's immediately fated, or at least he's given access to the highest circles of French society, effectively. So it gives a sense of how powerful his father was and how much his father was connected to French politics and the higher echelons of French society.
Yeah, I think that there is two moments in his first years in France. The first part of his life in France was taking place in Normandy, in Rouen, and he was at a sort of regional drawing school, which was a very reputed one, which was in fact training people for the best of them to access after that the Royal School in Paris, which he did very easily. And it was in Paris that he started to be protected or looked after by very important people in the aristocratic circles, in the power circles. A lot of people were really fond of him, and a lot of friends of his father are among his father's circles. We have a lot of documents showing that very high level society people were really asking if everything was right, if he was having access to all the competition that he needed to be part of. I mean, there was a sort of a attentive circle around him, yes.
And then, Esther, when he makes the painting that we're going to talk about, it's 1799 and it's shown in the Paris Salon at that time. So he's around 39 years of age. But what's his status at that time? What's his reputation as a painter by that point?
Right. So in the year that he submits that painting to the Salon, he is on the rise. He has returned from being a student at the French Academy in Rome, the Académie de France, and he is well situated in Paris. He's made powerful friends. He's very well supported, and he really tries his hand at public success. And so he submits that painting to the Salon, and it's a very ambitious and intimate painting, but it's also deeply personal, we believe.
Right. Okay. So tell us, Olivier, it's called Woman Leaning on a Portfolio, but this is more than just any random woman. It's not just any old model, is it? It's an important model to him personally.
Yes, and in fact, we have kept the title, which seems to be an anonymous sitter. But in fact, through the work we made to prepare the exhibition, we are now almost sure that it was his stepdaughter. He painted this painting representing his stepdaughter, Eugénie Servière, who was first Eugénie Charenne. Lethière's wife was first married to Monsieur Charenne, and he passed away. And then when Lethière married his wife, he also adopted Eugénie.
Right.
But interestingly, it's not only that he adopted Eugénie, he was also her teacher, as he did for many, many young girls or young ladies. And it's still quite unusual in this moment to see somebody who is welcoming women in his studio, to have them as students, which was not something common, which is probably even more or less common, is the fact that he was taking them sometime very early on. I mean, he was accepting young girls which were probably in their 7 or 8 years old moment.
Right.
And Eugénie was among this sort of student.
Right, that's really interesting, isn't it, Esther? Because she's very clearly established as an artist here. This is not a portrait of his stepdaughter in the family home and so on. In a way, he's welcoming her to the family. He's saying, I honour you as my daughter, but he's also saying, I honour you as an artist in this portrait. And that's quite significant, isn't it?
That's right. And if you look carefully at this beautiful image, you see that she's holding a porte-crayon, a chalk holder with a red chalk kind of peeking at the top. And then she's holding her portfolio of drawings, and peeking out of that portfolio are red chalk drawings. So we've really stopped her in the act of artistic practice. So it's an empowering image. And we learned through the course of putting together this exhibition that not only did he train women and girls, as Olivier mentioned, but he was a mentor to women and girls and believed fiercely in the rights of women to have artistic access. And this was really special of the period.
And you mentioned the reds in the painting, Esther. Olivier, there's the wonderful red in her hair. It seems like, is it partly missing, but there's a ribbon in her hair which kind of rhymes with the colour of the chalk and the chalk drawing. Is that right?
Yeah, it is a very subtle, it was probably slightly more striking when it was done, but it's a quite severe image. She's dressed mainly in black. There is not too many colors, but there is just 2 points of colors in the painting, one at the top, one at the bottom. And it's a very, very subtle, and the painting is stunning, even in its restrained way. And she's charming. It's a very, very nice painting, which is also making a sort of contrast with other paintings that we know of Lethière, which are more male dominant. But it's a very successful painting.
as you say, the sort of male-dominant pictures you're talking about, Esther, they're sort of grand history paintings, aren't they? And troubadour paintings, as they're called, also. So a mixture of genre and history. So he made his reputation very much with these extraordinary and vast, the sort of grand machine paintings, didn't he, Esther?
That's right. He was a history painter of the highest order, but he also could demonstrate his talent in all the genres. We have really exceptional examples of his hand at landscape painting. We're talking about a portrait. There are history paintings. He was an excellent draftsman. So he really worked throughout multiple genres.
And Olivier, is it too much to say that this painting prefigures Ingres? Because, of course, he taught Ingres when he was the director of the French Academy in Rome, and Ingres made a wonderful drawing of him. But there is that sort of elegance in the kind of austerity of the figure that it seems to me prefigures Ingres to a certain degree.
Well, there is many links between Ingres and Lethière. I think even before Ingres went to Rome, Lethière was in touch with Ingres because they were making a sort of pendant portrait. Lethière was doing Josephine, the Empress, and Ingres was doing Napoleon. And they knew each other before even Lethière went to Rome. And it's true that in this case, there is a sort of fascination for doing portraits. I think that Lethière, we cannot pair him with Ingres as a portraitist, but there is a sort of link between the two on this. There is obviously an interest. It could be that it is even more interesting to see that Lethière, who is still seen as a neoclassical, one of the purest neoclassical figure of his time, has been somebody who has championed portrait painters, landscape painters, and women artists. He's somebody who seems to be on the very neoclassical conservative side, when in fact his entire life is to support new way to do painting.
Right, that's really fascinating, that, isn't it? And Esther, he was very fleet-footed politically, let's say. When he first became a notable figure, he was aligned with the sort of establishment then, but also was then later feted by revolutionary figures, and then became a key figure, as we just heard from Olivier, in the Napoleonic period. So he was able to command a sort of powerful position within the arts across multiple regimes.
That's right. And it was a very difficult feat to accomplish. And this is part of his great skill, his agility to kind of have access to very powerful friends and allies, but to not overexert political alliances where he would be in danger, which was, of course, the case, famously or infamously the case with Jacques-Louis David. Yeah. But Lethière is much more nimble between regimes, which was to his advantage.
And how was this painting received? Is there any record of a critical response to it? We know that he was acclaimed in his time, but did this particular image receive any criticism?
This painting in itself did not receive a lot of attention, unlike some of his other paintings, which received a lot of attention and a lot of press. So there's not a lot of contemporary dialogue about it. But I just wanted to make one other point. The year that it was made, in around 1799, and something you said, Ben, about how he is acknowledging his stepdaughter, is the year that he is acknowledged by his own father and is given the name Guillaume. This is the year that the laws in France changed, and he was able to be formally recognized and given the family name, which was not the case before because he was born outside of marriage. And so this is a year of great importance, and this is also why he marries in that year, because he finally has the right to have the inheritance. He has the name. So it's a very important moment in his life, and the meaning of family and familial ties is something that was certainly pressing on his mind.
Absolutely. And his relationship with the Caribbean too, Olivier, never leaves his mind, does it? He has a strong relationship with, and a deeply political, it seems to me, relationship in terms of later paintings and so on, with that part of the world.
Yeah, which is also one of the most fascinating aspects of Lethière. For somebody who was born enslaved, through his entire life was 10 different regimes who hated each other. And to go through that without falling out of power in a way. But at the same time, he has been extremely faithful to his roots, at least with two different examples. First, he was very close to mixed race people living in Paris. We know his very strong relationship with the Dumas family, the father who was the general. Then after that, he was protecting Alexandre, the writer, even if Alexandre very quickly was not needing any protection because he was very, very famous by himself. And then there is plenty of other people that we know he was very close in this sort of Caribbean Afro-descendant circles. But at the same time, and that is the most surprising for somebody who was so attentive to please, or not probably to please, but at least to do not displease the regime, he took over this task to make this celebration of Haitian Revolution in 1822. And I think that was what you were alluding to. At a moment where France was at war with Haiti, was in fact in a very difficult relationship with Haiti. And Lethière was standing for that. That is a very, very moving thing about Lethière, that he was very faithful to his roots. At the same time, he was faithful to his circles, which were also plantation owners. Then this is something which is probably we have to reflect on now. There was far more nuances than we think at this period.
That's right, isn't it, Esther? That even though he was himself of mixed ethnic background, by inheriting his father's estate, he became a plantation owner, and therefore with all of the complications that entails.
That's right. So he was enslaved and he was an enslaver and he was an abolitionist, but he profited from the industry of enslavement. So it's very, very complicated and complex. And Olivier was mentioning this painting, which kind of encapsulates his allegiance to his place of birth. And he, in fact, sent his son to Haiti, and his son took it overseas on a ship, smuggled it out of France, and delivered it personally to the president of the Haitian Republic, who we know also through Lethière's last will and testament, that documentation of everything in his household, that he had correspondence, wrote many letters to the president of Haiti. So his ties were very firm, and they extended to the next generation. Another one of Lethière's sons would marry the daughter of a Haitian general and would go on to move to Haiti and would die in Haiti. So the ties between his family and Guadeloupe and Haiti and the Caribbean, very, very strong, but subversive, or kind of hidden or discreet, which was necessary for him to be successful and to not face persecution in France. So it's a really complicated and beautiful story.
It is indeed. So thank you both, Esther and Olivier, for telling us about this amazing artist.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Guillaume Lethière is at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts from the 15th of June to the 14th of October. It then travels to the Musée du Louvre in Paris from the 13th of November to the 17th of February next year. And that's it for this episode. You can find us on X, formerly Twitter, at Tan Audio, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. The Week in Art is produced by Julia Michalska, Alexander Morrison, and David Clack, and David's also the editor and sound designer. Thanks also to Danielle Hathaway and to our guests, Tim, Lynn, Esther, and Olivier. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.